It happened in a quiet field hospital, far from the roar of tanks and artillery, yet the echo of that moment would follow the Allied command for the rest of the war. The room smelled of antiseptic and dust. Wounded men lay on cots, some groaning softly, others staring blankly at the ceiling. Outside, the Sicilian sun burned down on a campaign that was grinding forward inch by inch. Inside, General George S. Patton walked among the wounded, his boots clicking sharply on the floor, his helmet polished, his presence unmistakable. Patton believed war was the ultimate test of will. He believed fear was contagious and weakness even more so. To him, a soldier who surrendered to fear endangered everyone around him. He had preached this belief to his officers and men since North Africa. Courage was not optional. Aggression was survival. Hesitation was death. That belief had driven his success, but on this day, it would nearly end his career. As Patton moved down the row of cots, he stopped in front of a young soldier sitting upright, his eyes hollow, his hands shaking. There was no visible wound. Patton asked him why he was there. The soldier answered quietly that he could not take it anymore. The shelling, the noise, the fear. He said his nerves were gone. Patton stiffened. To him, the words sounded like an admission of cowardice. He exploded. His voice cut through the hospital like a blade. He accused the soldier of disgrace. He called him a coward. Then, in a moment that stunned everyone in the room, Patton struck him. The sound of the slap was sharp and final. The soldier recoiled. Nurses froze. Doctors stared in disbelief. Patton stormed out, his anger barely contained, convinced he had done what discipline required. To him, the army was not a place for broken wills. But war is not only fought with weapons. It is fought with morale, with trust, with the belief that leaders understand the cost paid by those who fight. And this time, Patton had crossed a line. Word of the incident spread quickly. Hospitals talk. Soldiers talk faster. By the time reports reached higher headquarters, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Not just one incident, but two. Another soldier, another slap, another outburst. The whispers grew louder. Was Patton out of control? Had the most aggressive commander in the Allied army finally gone too far? The reports reached General Dwight D. Eisenhower days later. He read them in silence. Eisenhower was not a man given to impulsive reactions. He understood Patton better than most. He knew Patton's brilliance. He also knew his flaws. He had defended him before. He had overlooked controversies before. But this was different. This was not a remark, not a clash with another general. This involved a wounded soldier. Eisenhower leaned back in his chair, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. The war demanded leaders like Patton, bold, relentless, fearless. But the war also demanded unity, trust between soldiers and commanders. Eisenhower knew the damage this story could cause if it became public. He also knew that if he ignored it, discipline at the highest level would collapse. He called in Bradley. Bradley listened carefully as Eisenhower summarized the reports. Bradley had his own complicated relationship with Patton. They had known each other for years. They respected each other professionally, but Bradley often worried that Patton's temper would undo his achievements. This time, Bradley said nothing at first. He knew Eisenhower was weighing something far larger than punishment. Eisenhower finally spoke. He said Patton had crossed a moral boundary. He said that no matter how intense the pressure of command, no general had the right to strike a soldier who had already given more than most men could endure. He said the army could not afford to appear indifferent to the suffering of its own troops. But then Eisenhower said something else, something revealing. He said they could not afford to lose Patton either. That was the dilemma. Patton was not replaceable. His Third Army would later prove that beyond any doubt. Even then, in Sicily, his drive and aggression were critical to Allied momentum. Eisenhower understood that removing Patton permanently would satisfy outrage but weaken the war effort. The decision had to balance justice with necessity. Eisenhower decided on a course that would haunt Patton deeply. He would not publicly court-martial him. He would not remove him from command permanently. Instead, he would discipline him privately in a way that struck at Patton's pride. He ordered Patton to apologize personally to the soldiers involved, not a written statement, not a formality, a face-to-face apology. For Patton, this was devastating. He believed apologies undermined authority. He believed leaders must project absolute certainty. But Eisenhower was firm. This was not a request. It was an order. When Patton received the message, he was furious at first. He ranted to his staff. He complained that the army was becoming soft, that war was being sanitized. But beneath the anger, something else stirred: doubt. Patton was many things, but he was not immune to reflection. He knew the line between discipline and cruelty was thin, and deep down he knew he had acted in rage. Patton went to the hospitals. He stood before wounded men who had faced horrors few could imagine. He removed his helmet. His voice trembled as he spoke. He apologized, not with eloquence, not with polish, but with sincerity. Some soldiers accepted it quietly. Some stared at him without expression. The moment stripped Patton of his armor more effectively than any enemy fire ever could. Eisenhower watched from a distance, figuratively if not physically. He did not gloat. He did not soften his stance, but he took note. Patton obeyed. Patton endured humiliation. That mattered. Behind closed doors, Eisenhower wrote in his personal notes that Patton's conduct had been indefensible, but his value to the army was undeniable. He resolved to keep Patton under tighter control. No more public outbursts. No more unchecked behavior. One more major incident, and even Patton would be finished. For months afterward, Patton was sidelined. While other commanders led major operations, he was kept in the background. It was a punishment without official announcement, but Patton felt it deeply. He feared his career was over. He wrote in his diary that he had failed himself, failed his men, failed the army. Yet history has a way of turning moments of disgrace into lessons of restraint. When Patton returned to command later, something had changed. The fire was still there. The aggression remained. But there was a new awareness. A recognition that leadership was not only about driving men forward, but understanding when they had reached the edge. Eisenhower never publicly spoke in detail about the slapping incidents during the war. He protected the army's image. He protected Patton, but in private conversations, he was clear. He said Patton had nearly destroyed himself. He said brilliance without control was dangerous. He said the incident proved that even the greatest commanders needed limits. Years later, Eisenhower reflected on the episode with remarkable honesty. He said Patton was a man born to fight wars, not manage emotions. He said that in another era, Patton might have been celebrated without restraint, but modern war demanded more than ferocity. It demanded humanity. For Patton, the lesson never fully faded. He carried the weight of that day with him until the end of his life. He spoke less about cowardice and more about endurance. He drove his men hard, but he also ensured better rest, better supplies, better medical care. Not because he had become soft, but because he had learned that strength took many forms. The soldiers who heard the story did not forget it either. To some, Patton was still the general who slapped a broken man. To others, he was the commander who later saved entire divisions through speed and audacity. Both were true. War does not produce simple heroes. It produces complicated men shaped by impossible choices. Eisenhower's handling of the incident revealed something essential about his leadership. He understood that command was not about absolute authority, but balance. He disciplined without destroying. He corrected without humiliating publicly. He kept the army together when it could have fractured. In the end, what Eisenhower said about Patton was not delivered in a speech or a headline. It was delivered through action, through restraint, through a decision that allowed Patton to redeem himself on the battlefield rather than disappear into disgrace. And when Patton later led the Third Army across France, turned it north in the dead of winter, and smashed through to relieve Bastogne, Eisenhower watched with grim satisfaction. The same man who had once lost control in a hospital now executed one of the most disciplined maneuvers of the war. History remembers Patton for his victories. It remembers Eisenhower for his leadership. But the moment that bound them together was not a triumph. It was a failure, a slap in a quiet hospital that forced two powerful men to confront the cost of command. Because sometimes the most important battles are not fought against the enemy, but within the men entrusted to lead. Thanks for watching.